late April, a campaign began on Twitter to promote a science project proposed for a NASA student challenge that asked young people from across the country to submit their best and brightest scientific novel ideas. In the category for grades 9 to 12, the Upspark Challenge asked these students to essentially reverse engineer existing NASA technology to apply to everyday life in new ways. And again, for students in the 9 to 12 grade range, the prize for this competition was a 2-day trip to the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center for a behind-the-scenes, hand-on workshop with scientists and astronauts, and a $4,000 grant to bring their ideas to fruition. Near the end of the judging process, NASA published an online poll that the public could vote on for the winner. Now, NASA would ultimately select the winner, but the poll was really so that, you can vote for your kid or yourself. So, in relation to this, what precisely was the project that this social media campaign I mentioned was promoting? I mean, if it got to trending, it must have been a pretty impressive proposal, right? Except no, it doesn't really seem so. Even from the statements made on Twitter, it seems that the only reason anyone gave a fuck about this particular submission was not the ingenuity of the project itself, but the skin color and sex of the applicants. These 3 young ladies from the DC area who were championed, again, not for their project, but because they were African American girls. But regardless of why they were voting, that little campaign on Twitter went on for a few days, with the girls reaping a whopping 77% approval in the poll, vastly outweighing their competition, which had been in first place before the campaign, until, of course, 4chan and various other people outside of Black Twitter caught wind of the campaign to upvote this project over competitors who may or may not, and we'll get into that, be more qualified. Visualize my surprise, though. They actually thought it would be funny to fuck with the poll. Wow! A bunch of anonymous people thought it would be funny to mess with some shit online. What a shocker! And as such, in typical internet fashion, they began to downvote and even hack, if you can call it that, this simple poll against the girls' favor. Now, again, this had nothing to do with the final decision of the challenge. It was just a public poll, meaning, it was public, so anyone can vote on it. And since then, the media has been on the goddamn warpath, labeling this action as some bored anons to fuck with an online poll, already being fucked with very visibly as a rampant display and evidence of systematic racism, if not outright Nazism, from the 400-pound hacker known as 4chan. Oh, alas, these poor girls. If only they had closed their curtains and bought a dog and been behind 7 proxies, they would have been safe. Actually, NASA should have been behind the 7 proxies, shouldn't they? This is clearly, though, a blatant display and evidence of the racism that is rampant not only in the United States but across the world for these hideous trolls to sabotage this ingenious project and these girls who are truly deserving of the trip to the NASA Goddard Space Center and the $4,000 grant. Except it looks like it wasn't Poll, the politically incorrect board, that was responsible for the, quote, hacking. It seems like it was G. That's the technology board that was more involved in the so-called hacking, and I mean, this is an SQL page. It's not like it was rocket surgery or anything.
It doesn't take rocket appliances to realize all you gotta do is take a fucking chain, hook it up to a truck, and yank the fucking vacuum machine out of the store.
Well, it is NASA, so maybe it was, right? But from what I can see from these threads on G, it doesn't look as if this was overwhelmingly racially motivated, but rather a product of the disinhibition effect of de-individuation, of anonymity. In other words, they were having a giggle and having an opportunity to hack NASA.
You're gonna burn, all right.
Quote unquote. In response to an existing campaign that we all found on Twitter that was being engaged in to upvote the girls. Essentially, people said, well, you're gonna vote them up, we'll do the same thing back. But that doesn't mean any of this behavior was not racially motivated. Not in the least. Certainly some of it was. Of course there are people who would vote against these girls and their project just because they are black. Thus, it totally makes sense that in response to the poll being raided by not just one group, not just one group or group of individuals, but by multiple groups of individuals, and by that I mean people on opposite sides of the coin, the mayor of the District of Columbia committed $4,000 to the girls, regardless of whether or not NASA selects their project as the winner, which, well, given their public responses lamenting racism, let's just say I wouldn't be, too surprised if they end up winning. It is worth noting that the district is one of the worst school systems in the country, with a massive problem not only in their abysmal outcomes of her students, but with massive financial issues as well, such as a huge disparity in teacher-student ratio, despite the enormous amounts of money that the district dumps into the school system. Yes, that's right, DC spends some of the most on their schools and yet has some of the lowest outcomes. But yeah, thanks DC. That's an excellent use of those funds to contribute to your already wasteful system. Just give them the $4,000 and pat them on the back and say, good job. You win without doing shit. And obviously, this has been a media shitstorm with tons of articles written about these poor girls being robbed of their just reward for their ingenious project by a bunch of racist hackermans. Oh, by the way, did you know that they're all a bunch of losers in their mom's basement? Wow, what a bunch of turbo nerds. Also, in general, just fuck white people. I mean, look at the outrage, despite the fact that this poll actually in the long run meant nothing for the competition at large. Particularly now since NASA has said so directly that they would not be counting anything that happened during this, quote, raid. Allowing for the previous votes, however, for the girls to remain relevant, but now excluding the supposed racist votes, none of which mattered for the ultimate outcome to the contest in the first place. So you know what? Given this outrage, I decided to take a kind of in-depth look at the project itself, since the argument is that, oh no, it's not that these girls are girls, or that they are black, it's that they deserve to win this prize. It works, it functions. They received this praise regardless of their race or sex, and they were only prevented from winning because of racist trolls who couldn't recognize their ingenuity and genius. So, you know, let's just ignore the Twitter campaign and the campaigns that happened on other sides of the internet, which are, you know, the reasons why pretty much anyone on any side of the internet paid any attention to this fucking high school science competition in the first place, and let's actually look at the project itself. What is this project that was so deserving of national recognition, of the $4,000 prize, and $4,000 from the DC city? It was deserving of attention from every major news outlet pretty much, in face of the hacker known as 4chan, fucking with a public poll. But clearly, it must have been a great project, so let's take a look at it. And I am going to be honest here. I wanted to take a fair look at it. Maybe it was not a Twitter and online campaign that was specifically designed to artificially inflate the votes for this specific group based purely on their genetic components such as race or their sex, gone awry when trolls then artificially deflated the votes for arguably the same reason, although not necessarily, given the chaotic nature of anonymity and de-individuation. I mean, who can really say for sure what the intent of a troll is in most cases? But again, I feel we need to be fair here. Maybe this project really was the best and most deserving of winning this national competition. As such, I spent a little bit of time looking into water filtration systems because that's what this project was about. It was about filtering water to make it safe for high school use. Now, let's put the obvious Flint references aside for a minute because I know that's gonna be in your head, but let's just look at water filter systems. I don't know shit myself about water filtration systems, and I haven't taken high school chemistry since, high school. So I could be really off base here, but after all, hey, this is a high school level project, so I would like to think I can figure out what's going on in this, this diagram. Diagram? Shit, I'm sorry, guys. I said I'm trying to be fair, but this looks like some kind of Wile E. Coyote sketch now, doesn't it? Crap, sorry again. I am trying to be fair. Try to be fair, Aiden. What exactly are we looking at here? Now, the page doesn't really help to clarify much more than the diagram does, and after watching their explanation, I can't say I understand much more than I get from the illustration.
Our spin-off technology will eliminate impurities found in water, such as copper and lead, providing clean, pure water to public school systems in our community.
Unbalanced water will travel through this tube into the filtering jar.
As the impure water travels through the bucket and through the tube, which will be embedded with pH strips to show the discoloration in the water, it will land in our filtering jar. Once in the jar, it will be put through a continuous spin cycle, which will be spun by an electric fan embedded in the base of the jar. As it spins in the jar, our filtering floss, which will be embedded inside of the jar, will collect the particles and bacteria found in the water, such as copper and lead.
After the water cycle, the water exits through a new tube into a bucket, providing clean, drinkable water.
But I am trying my best here to comprehend what is being proposed, because after all, it is completely possible that this is brilliant and I'm a retard. So, what do we have here? An upper basin listed with water with copper, a fan, a line of filter floss, which, yes, guys, it is misspelled or appears to be misspelled as filter hoss, and there are misspellings across the presentation, but that's not really that important. But anyway, run through some filter floss through a straw into a lower basin labeled with clean water. Now, there are all kinds of things that become confusing here beyond just the misspelling of floss and hoss, as I said, such as the name of the project being From H2No to H2O. Well, H2No, that doesn't make any sense chemically. And this perplexed some people similarly as I am trying to understand the project, as, for example, H2NO3 is the formula for nitric acid. And I at least have no clue how one would accomplish that, but no, it's just a stupid pun. H2No to H2O. But from what I can glean from the short videos and the diagrams, the fan attached to the bottom of the upper basin will cause bacteria and inorganic compounds, such as lead, to be dragged through the bottom, through these filters, and then the clean water is filtered down into the second basin? Okay, let's try to break this down. As far as I can tell, the idea for this is pretty much a combination of a number of existing water filtration systems. Again, this is not a competition for water filtration systems in the first place, but it is a competition to apply existing NASA technology to the real world. So maybe that's what's happening here, right? The basic design for this appears to be essentially a common water filtration system, though, using copper as a coagulant for inorganic compounds in the water, and potentially also as an antimicrobial as copper is, mixing the water to encourage this coagulation and then sedimentation of the heavier components. Then, that allows the components to remain in the upper chambers through the use of gravity, and the filter floss then forcing the clean water out through the bottom. This system actually works, but it works in massive scales with long-term filtration processes through sand or some other sort of particle. Huge mixing devices to incur the coagulation of inorganics with the additive of long periods of sedimentation and separation, rather than a quick run-through of a simple filter purchasable at any pet shop. They even mention in their proposal that the cost may be a factor. Yeah, that's because this mass method of filtration is already utilized by cities and municipalities to filter water, meaning that the water coming into your school potentially already went through this precise process in macro. Or at least that, which I just described, is what I thought was going on, before I listened a little bit more and a few times over to these videos, and realized, no, that was not the process that was apparently being used here. It was not using copper as an anticoagulant or as an antimicrobial. No, instead, it looks as though the point was to show that a filter, a fish filter, filtered out large chunks of copper from the resulting water, and the fan seemingly plays no role at all other than to move the water around. Look, I think what maybe happened here, and this is again, I'm being fair, is that they learned about or saw some existing information about these kinds of municipal water filtration systems, and either they didn't quite get it, or they were trying to recreate it in micro and didn't understand that it doesn't quite work that way. But again, trying to be fair, so let's move on. A lot of the discussion about this project online revolved around speculation that this is just a basic still, because it kind of looks like one, and also because they are incredibly unclear in what things like fan mean, when it could actually mean some sort of heating system. The fan is just that when we look at how their project was enacted. It's a fan. If they were to have a heating component, and reverse the orientation of the YOLO Solo cup, I mean basins, they would have a basic water still, which converts liquid water into steam and filters out its particulates. You can make one in your home and make potable salt water because it's fucking ancient technology. Actually, all of this is fucking ancient technology on some level or another. We have been heating water, running it through sand and gravel filters and so on for thousands upon thousands of years. The Egyptians discovered the coagulation process somewhere around 1500 BC. But no, it's not a still. It's not using copper as a coagulant, with gravity as a part of the process. So what is this supposed to be doing exactly? Well, my last guess, and as I was learning all about water filters, thanks Alex, was that the fan was designed to apply pressure onto the water, pushing it through the filter in an attempt at achieving reverse osmosis. But, that's a fish tank filter, and that alone is not gonna cut it. Particularly when it comes to what they're talking about in this, which is drinking water in schools, typically already water that has been distilled and processed, which ends up potentially taking on lead ions by passing through the school's pipe system where the lead has been eroding over time. Yeah, a simple filter is not going to remove lead ions, just as it won't remove any heavy metal ions from the water that has likely already been filtered through some previous method before it entered the school, be it through any of the methods I have described above, or others such as ion exchange. The kind of contamination that they are concerned with is molecular, after all. But when it comes to a reverse osmosis, let's just quickly take a look at the number of filtrations that are involved in the reverse osmosis process. Look, I'm not saying, obviously, that reverse osmosis doesn't work to filter water, as with all of these methods I've described. Of course it does. But that's why we already use these systems. I also get, guys, that this is a high school project, and the solo cup experiment was just proof of concept. And that's the point, right, Aiden? Many articles bring this up, the fact that the experiment worked. The girls are so assured that it worked that they drank the water after they ran it through the device. This simple project that I apparently can't understand, it worked. But wait, how did it work? How did you measure that it worked? Well, they measured it by assessing the pH in the water. That, of course, says nothing about the fact that the proposed nature of the project aimed to remove bacteria and inorganic particles from the water, as well as heavy metals. But hey, they raised the pH, and that is proof the device works, and thereby this is an award-winning project that deserves not only NASA accolades, but a $4,000 grant and budget behind it from the city of DC, right? Except no, guys, let me explain what I think happened. In order to prove their device works at raising the pH, despite the fact that it will do nothing to remove, say, lead ions or even bacteria or anything beyond relatively large particles from the water supply, they added fucking copper to the water, flushed it through a filter, now that filter clogged with copper, and then threw into another cup through a straw, ensuring that it got lots of exposure to the copper. Well, guess what happens when you introduce copper to water? It alkalizes it. It increases the pH. Using a copper water bottle will change the, quote, quality of your water just as much as this will. This now celebrated breakthrough from these brilliant young scientists, at least according to the research that I've done on the topic, and as was illustrated by Suda et al. 2012, in the effects of copper not only as an antimicrobial, but on its effect on pH levels. Again, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Again, this is not my field of inquiry, but it seems that copper is one of a fairly small number of metals that alkalize water in this way. Look, at this point I'm probably coming off as a total hard bitch, and I don't want to rag on these girls too hard. They're kids. They're 16, 17, 18. None of these projects are going to be overwhelmingly complicated, and I don't expect them to be. But the reward for this competition was $4,000 and a trip to NASA, and that is a huge deal for most teenagers. Particularly teenagers with an interest, a true interest and passion for math and science. And I'm not saying these girls don't have an interest and passion in math or science. They all say that they want to go into STEM-related fields as adults. But my point is that the greatest project should win by its own merit, and not because of a Twitter campaign made to promote these girls into the spotlight based solely on the color of their skin and the nature of their sex, rather than the quality of the project itself. And if we want to be really specific here, look at the winner of the 2017 contest. Are you noticing some significant differences? Again, what they did was basically indicate how copper affects the pH of water. Go get a copper water bottle, you guys, and try it out for yourself. Well, yes, absolutely, the design does appear to be based on actual water filtration technology that works. They appeared, and again, I think I've been generous as fuck here, to fundamentally not understand how or why that technology works. And I'm actually at this point not sure in which way would be the generous route to proceed. Either they fundamentally didn't understand that copper raises the pH of water, the one test that they chose to conduct, on the pH. Or the more insidious way of looking at this, which is that they did fundamentally understand this, and they intentionally selected copper as an element to add to their water, and chose only to conduct a pH test because they knew it would raise the pH to, quote, prove the device works to all of the ding-dongs on Twitter and then later the social media outlets, and go, oh wow, look, their device works, these are brilliant scientists. You know, never attribute to malice what can be adequately explained by stupidity and all, and I honestly don't give a fuck one way or another what their intent was, because whether this was an accident or an intentional act of deception that would never have passed the scrutiny of even the slightest scientific questioning from the folks at NASA, I now have to give kind of a fuck about it because Black Twitter and now the mainstream media have shown a spotlight upon it and used it as a representation of systemic racism in the United States over this project, again compared to the previous year's winner. And I have to say sorry. It's a project about water potability from a group of young black girls being held up as triumph against racism. Flint anyone. This was, on some level, at least to me, and I'm being completely speculative here, on some level racially motivated from the start. At least a little bit. Maybe I'm wrong, but I certainly see that connection with Flint. I have to at least question if the use of copper was not intentionally malicious. If not on the part of the girls, then maybe someone else involved in the project, so that they could say, yay, look, we did it, and manufacture this entire phony outrage. I think these are probably very nice young girls. I don't have any reason to believe that they would have done anything maliciously or wrong. This is just kind of questionable, right? And I mentioned last year's finalists, but if we look at the other people who were winning before, the other groups, from what I can tell, they all seem to have a fairly basic understanding of the science they're describing here. Oftentimes it's above my comprehension. Again, I haven't taken physics or chemistry since high school. So I honestly can't tell you if it's actually a well-intentioned but clueless couple of teenagers engaging in a true attempt at scientific discovery and involvement, or maliciousness, pretending to be retarded, so that a family member could then start a campaign on Twitter and this end up where the fuck we are now. That is that these girls were just given $4,000. Anyway, they were given it regardless of whether or not they win the competition. And then the media gets a nice little chance to cry about racism on the internet once again. In other words, in the end, merit didn't matter. This would have been a cute little project for a bunch of high schoolers to potentially get a chance to go to NASA, not space camp, my friends, which I would have killed you to go as a kid, but NASA itself, the Goddard Space Flight Center. I would have committed a genocide to go to NASA as a kid. Yeah, an adorable little Lolly Aiden genocide, I'm sure, but moreover, you get 4 big ones to put toward a project. That must be an incredibly life and self-affirming experience that probably would encourage most of these kids to attempt to follow their dreams and aspirations in STEM. Well, now it's nothing more than a footnote, so we can use racism as an excuse to give handouts and pity points to those who didn't seem to earn it by any sense of merit. The original campaigns from people on Twitter and elsewhere were not talking about the merit of these girls' project. It was talking about them being 3 black girls. Just as the $4,000 from a city with one of the worst public school systems in the country has nothing to do with merit, all because the hacker known as 4chan campaigned back in response.
Do we even know who is this 4chan?
And what's the problem with this? Why am I talking about it beyond the fact that it irritated me? It irritated me to the point where I spent a whole day researching water filters.
What do you think tap water is? It's a gay bomb, baby. And I'm not saying people didn't naturally have homosexual feelings. I'm not even getting into it, quite frankly. I mean, give me a break. You think I am like, oh, shocked by it, so I'm up here bashing it because I don't like gay people? I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
And again, I wanted to go through the science of the project itself because, well, that's just how I am. Wake up, read some stupid news articles, and then spend the day learning how water filters work.
Fucking magnets, how do they work?
The point is, it's important that we go through what this project was, that I describe it in detail, so that this can't just be explained away by the media the way it is being explained away. Of, oh, it works, oh, it's functional, oh, it's ingenious. No, we have to actually look at it. And I don't just mean laughing at the diagram, because maybe it was ingenious, maybe it really was. I've seen mathematicians write on chalkboards before. Not always the most, elegant handwriting. So we had to go through this, and we had to talk about what was going on here. And I could be wrong. It's not my field, but I did my best. And I really don't think we're looking at anything other than either confusion or misdirection. And I truly believe that it was confusion. Anyway, here's the point. This is all, once again, indication of the soft bigotry of low expectations. It creates an environment of learned helplessness. I've spoken about this before, and I'm sure a particularly long video that I made on a University of Hawaii professor and Ivy League graduate who worked with a field-medaled scholar to produce her doctoral thesis, which essentially amounted to 80 pages of her whining about her life, and then a paragraph of proof with no proof that she actually wrote it, because it looks like maybe it was written by her advisor. But that was a while ago, so let's go over what it is again. Learned helplessness theory is fairly simple. When you keep someone down for long enough, they just simply stop trying to fight back. Seligman 1972, in his seminal examination of this effect, used dogs who were placed in cages and given shocks. In some conditions, the dogs were able to press a lever in order to stop the shocks from happening. As we've learned from Pavlov's experiments on behavioral psychology, the dogs quickly learned to press the lever to stop the shocks and to prevent themselves from experiencing pain. But the dogs who had no ability to cease their own torture eventually just gave up on trying to escape. They laid down and whined as they continued to be shocked. In essence, the dogs became depressed and gave up on any attempt to escape or ease the pain. Cox, Abramson, Devine, and Holt in 2012 suggest, based on learned helplessness models, that this effect can apply to racial stereotypes in that people develop schema, mental heuristics, regarding races in what we call stereotypes, negative or positive, and that in an extension of this, and the extension of the findings of Beck, 1967, that negative perceptions of the self result in depression. By this logic, Cox et al. Suggests a Beckian self-perception-oriented depression can be instigated and initiated by negative stereotypes about one's own race being held internally in one's mental schema. In his analysis of stigma, Goffman 1963 made similar notes about how members of stigmatized groups often come to be self-loathing, but also self-loving in a kind of weird limbo. The point being is that if you possess certain negative schema regarding a group you belong to, that negative schema, because it is part of your sense of the self, of the group that you belong to, can therefore cause depression. I am part of this group. I have negative feelings about this group. Therefore, I feel depressed and upset with myself. And that prolonged periods of depression further can result in the cyclical effect of learned helplessness. Why even try? We'll just fail, right? We've seen this in education, that children who reported feeling more helpless rather than more mastery-oriented were more likely to anticipate their failure in future tasks, as Diener and Dweck 1980 found. Mastery-oriented children were less affected after experiencing a failure than helpless, chronically helpless children in their perceptions of their own performance and anticipation of their further success in future performances. In other words, holding negative stereotypes or beliefs about ourselves, be it racially oriented or academically or any combination therein, can potentially lead to a cycle of learned helplessness with the anticipation of failure. Thereby, what do? Do we engage? Do we work hard? No, we lie down and whine and cry. Outside of the self, as a social species, much of our behavior is, of course, influenced by others, right? So how do these stereotypes and negative behaviors orienting from others affect this potentially? Well, we've seen this effect in the classroom as well. In another now famous experiment, the Pygmalion research from Rosenthal and Jacobson 1968 isolated the expectancy effect of the self-fulfilling prophecy. In this seminal study, which, as many of its time, have been criticized, and rightly so, for possible flaws in methodology, teachers told some students that they were likely to do well in the upcoming school year, and didn't tell other students. The students who were told this, after a period of time, displayed an increased performance on IQ tests. And again, while there may be flaws in the initial research, decades of data have supported the validity of self-fulfilling prophecies in education. Good and Brophy 1980 laid out the method by which this self-fulfilling prophecy effect is incurred in a pedagogical environment in the following steps. 1. Early in the school year, teachers form differential expectations for student behavior and achievement. 2. Consistent with these differential expectations, teachers behave differently towards various students. 3. This treatment tells students something about how they are expected to behave in the classroom and perform academic tasks. 4. If the teacher's treatment is consistent over time, and if students do not actively resist or change, it will affect their self-concept, achievement motivation, level of aspiration, classroom contact, and interactions with the teacher. And this is an aside because what we know about something called the primacy effect is that first impressions matter. So if you leave a negative impression first, or if teachers evaluate you negatively in the outset, well, it's most likely that they will continue to perceive you that way, regardless of future behaviors. Well, there's also the recency effect and all, whatever. Primacy effect seems to matter most. 5. These effects generally will complement and reinforce the teacher's expectations, so that students will come to conform to these expectations more than they might otherwise have. And 6, that ultimately, this will affect student achievement and other outcomes. High expectation students will be led to achieve at the near of their potential, but low expectation students will not gain as much as they could have if taught differently. Teachers can express lower expectations in all kinds of mannerisms beyond outright stating to some students that they will perform more competently, such as we saw in the seminal Pygmalion study. This anticipation can be expressed by teachers giving low expectation students easier tasks, asking less of them and spending less time focusing on their success, calling on them less frequently, and simply kind of ignoring them. Just giving them a passing grade. I mean, really, what could we call a greater example of this effect than No Child Left Behind? For a review, I suggest see Cotton and Wikelund 1989. That's actually a very accessible study, it's not even academic. But it assessed 49 documents analyzing expectations of student learning outcomes and found consistent support for the extents and potency of the effect of self-fulfilling prophecies on students in all different sort of contexts and in all different sort of environs. Thus, not only can internal perceptions of failure lead to long-term feelings of helplessness, but similarly, external anticipations of failure lead to behavioral responses of lowered performance. So, why does this all matter? My point here is this. Situations like this one, as minor and isolated as they may be, are symptomatic of a social disease. The soft bigotry of low expectations, and I don't care who the fuck coined it, it's true. It has produced this effect, and it seems that one can't escape it in the current political climate. Whenever there is an accusation of racism that quickly and easily absolves one of any responsibility or necessity to try, to work, to integrate into society even. For example, I saw this video. This woman made a tearful, crying video accusing a cop of harassing her, only to have the body camera footage show he was overwhelmingly polite.
The man threatens to pull me out of the car. We shouldn't be afraid to drive and get pulled over by the police. And I'm telling you, I showed him my license, asked him why I was stopped, and he said that I was going 70 and a 65, or 60 and a something like some kind of small difference. And so I'm in the middle of a rural little town, and I'm sorry that I'm upset, but I don't get upset too much. Usually I get angry. I don't get afraid.
So you didn't give me a warning, you gave me an actual ticket? Yeah, no warnings today, ma'am. So your court date is going to be June the 6th at 10:30 for the speeding of 70 and a 55. You have the option to prepay this. I'm going to give you a phone number plus a website that has our courthouse information. If you contact our courts, they will tell you what the fine is, answer any one of your questions, and if you decide to prepay it, then you do not have to come to court. But if you want to prepay it, if you don't want to prepay it, then you have to come to court on June the 6th at 10:30.
I'll hire an attorney.
Need you to sign right here?
I'm not going to sign that ticket.
Ma'am. Okay.
But I don't have to sign it.
So, ma'am.
But I appreciate it.
Hold on. Me. All right. So, what you're signing here is a promise to either come to court or a promise to prepay. It's not an admission of guilt. It's only a promise to me that you're going to get it taken care of by either coming to court or prepaying it. If you refuse to sign the summons at this point, I'm going to have to get you outside of the police car, outside of this car. I'm going to place you under arrest and take you in front of a magistrate. I will get your vehicle towed and go from there. So, yes, ma'am, you do not have a choice. You have... I don't care about that. You do not have... I don't care who's on the phone. I'm talking to you right now. You do not have a choice but to sign the summons. So once again, you're signing right there. So thank you. I knew you were going to sign it. Thank you very much.
She had been going 15 miles over the speed limit and then basically refused to cooperate with him. Now, obviously the point of this video is to gain sympathy, but given the psychology of learned helplessness and self-fulfilling prophecies, maybe this woman also really did, on some level, see what was happening here to her as actual discrimination, because they see discrimination everywhere because they have been taught socially and systematically, some real systematic shit there, to believe that racism is everywhere and that they cannot escape it, and it's easier to lie down and cry. And what have we done with these girls? We basically just introduced them to a major dosage of accepting the bigotry of low expectations. Why should any of these girls work at accomplishing anything? Why should they try to achieve anything at all? I guarantee you they're all gonna get fucking free rides to Ivy League institutions that are apologizing for their white guilt over this.
Now, it's all the way down to
water filters.
I gotta admit, I don't think I give a
So why try? Why attempt to achieve anything when you can just roll over and cry racism and receive the exact same reward, if not greater reward? My point is that this is not good for society, obviously. Not just all the kids whose ideas were ignored because a Twitter campaign was more concerned with the race of the individuals involved than the purpose of the project, nor for the girls who, again, rather than getting a potential to experience that awesome chance of winning by virtue of their talent, ingenuity, and intellect, to go to NASA. They just had all of their dreams kind of dashed, sort of in a way, did they not? But certainly for the culture at large, that the average person will see certainly one of the 1,000 articles written about this and think, oh gee, black people have it so hard, those dang racists won't let these ingenious girls win a competition that they clearly deserve to win. Fuck white people, right? And thereby it perpetuates itself interminably. This process manifests itself in two forms. First, in the self, in the form of learned helplessness. What is the message behind all of this rigmarole? That black people cannot accomplish anything of their own, particularly not black women. That's why they need a hashtag to push them forward in the first place, right? And then when the internet reacted by fucking with a poll, which they are always want to do, and again, the intention behind it doesn't really necessarily matter in the long run given the outcome, the media at large shits itself in excitement over a new chance to cry racism and further promote how black people can't do anything by their own virtue, so let's just give them $4,000 in prize money. Well, if you're a black person and you ingest this, not just media, but this social interaction on a daily basis, it's no surprise you might end up with a mental cognitive schema regarding black people as being weak and incapable of achievement on their own without outside assistance. This in turn potentially results in depression and, over time, learned helplessness. Why work if you can cry? Why should you try anything if the white man's just gonna keep you down after all? The second form originates from the external, in the concept of white guilt and pity parties for minorities in general, such as we saw here. Oh no, some trolls rated a public online poll that arguably you were rating yourselves in the first place. You know, depending on your definition of a raid. I mean, apparently Sinatra and me shitposting on a mundane Matt stream is a raid, so your guess is as good as mine. Oh shit, an online poll was manipulated, you poor black people. Just take my money. Please forgive me for my abhorrent, hideous whiteness.
So many of these people, almost all of them that we see, are so poor and they are so black. And this is going to raise lots of questions for people who are watching this story unfold.
Except the thing is, this potentially is bad for the black population in the long term because it is a form of lowered expectations, potentially eliciting self-fulfilling prophecy effects. Leftists seem to constantly harp on this idea that black people are the eternal victims who laugh all forms of self-efficacy because of some invisible social forces of racism. Well then, as we've seen, that potentially elicits lower outcomes in their performance from the group being the target of lowered expectations by, well, who could it be? You! It is possible that the maintenance of this narrative in the mainstream is actually more responsible for keeping black women, quote-unquote, out of STEM than anything else, than any racism, in the long-term effects of self-fulfilling prophecies. I mean, are black women being physically kept out of STEM, out of NASA, as is so often implied? Well, fuck no. One of them retweeted this dumb crap. This is a black astronaut. There have been black female astronauts and plenty of black women across all STEM fields. Now, are they equal in number to the number of white and Asian men in STEM, even when accounting for population percentage? No. They're not. Likely in part due to the same reason that white women, or women in general, are not as prominent in those fields. Namely, that there are some genetic differences across the populations. Not only are men and women different, and thus often choose different occupational fields, statistically on average, we know that African Americans tend to differ from white Americans on IQ, the general measure of what we refer to as intelligence, related to all sorts of other variables such as occupational and educational success, by a single standard deviation. This is in no way a determinant of any one individual, nor does it in any way preclude African Americans from being able to enter technical fields, but it may, in part, explain why we see a lower percentage of Black people in some scientific areas of research and occupation in comparison to white and Asian people. As I said, this describes no one individual, but it does describe general trends. Thus, on average, any randomly selected African American person drawn out of a random sample may struggle to excel higher in STEM than a randomly selected Asian person. This, of course, does not mean there cannot be brilliant Black scientists and thinkers. Of course there are. And I know I'm stepping on eggshells here because trying to describe this without some ding-dong taking one line out of context to accuse me of being a cross-burning Klansman, woman? It's not racism. It's an observable group difference in heritability of a variable, in this case, the G factor, IQ. My point in bringing this up at all is not racism. Again, it's actually quite the opposite. Given that Black people are at a little bit, on average, a genetic disadvantage, again, statistical and in aggregate, God, how many times do I have to say that? To succeed in fields that generally sieve through candidates for those who are the absolute highest in intelligence. Why would we compound this actual legitimate potential disadvantage with socially induced ones such as learned helplessness and self-fulfilling prophecies? Based purely on statistical averages, it is not shocking that we see fewer Black men than white men in STEM, and particularly that we see fewer Black women than white men in STEM. But why then would we go forward and encourage that which, according to the data, has no capacity to ameliorate the existing hereditary differences, but may actively discourage young Black women from entering this field from a psychosocial aspect? Alright, because of the soft bigotry of low expectations. Thus, what does any of this accomplish? Is this a victory in the fight against rampant discrimination coming from the massive online Nazi enclaves that exist en masse? If anything, what we did was teach 3 girls, if they hadn't already been taught, that they don't have to try, and that embracing victimhood is beneficial, thus likely ingraining those schema about the weakness of Black people within them and other young Black people as well. All while the media fawns over them as victims incapable of achieving on their own merit because of those dang racist trolls, again potentially eliciting further self-fulfilling prophecy effects and leading to lower perceptions of ability and self-efficacy in Black teens. So who is this good for? Very likely, in the long term, well, not the girls, because the fact that they got $4,000 and have been rewarded regardless of their merit, and certainly not for society at large. It is good, I suppose, for the legacy media, who again has something to write an article about, an article with no regard to the welfare of anyone involved, so long as it gets a few clicks, right? And I know this is seemingly a dumb topic that I shouldn't have made a fucking 40-minute video on, but it piqued my attention because I enjoy any story that concerns the media's seeming ongoing inability after a decade and a half of being incapable of reaching even a modicum of comprehension of 4chan, anonymity, and the effects of de-individuation in computer-mediated communication. Again, considering we've only been studying it since the 80s. It's an entire field of inquiry, with hundreds, if not thousands, of published academic articles related to it. Mainstream media, Still can't get it. But this also potentially is of interest because it is detrimental to society at large, removing the agency of Black people, particularly young Black people, via the effects of learned helplessness and self-fulfilling prophecies. Everything about this and the media kerfuffle surrounding it is, detrimental. And I think, as such, it's important that I make a note of it. Oh, and also because how dare these girls try to step on the territory of my beloved Uncle Alex in the business of water filter sales.
I really enjoy it when the globalists try to poison us, and, we resist them via a free market system. Hello, my fellow info warriors. Alex Jones here, introducing you to the ProPure family of gravity-fed filters.
If you've enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. I'm Aiden Paladin, I'll Bolt.